Hello, and welcome to the week Unspun. It feels so good to be back. And I am Farzana. I am in London, in the back of an Uber because I have just come from a Christmas team lunch. And my colleagues?
I'm Doug Downs in Western Canada, but not in an Uber.
And I'm David Gallagher, also in London. I was wondering where you were, Farzana.
Driving back from Prague? Like, did you Uber from Prague just to get home?
Oh gosh, I wish. So we have got a jam-packed session with you for you guys today. Now, please, for those who are tuning in from LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, feel free to comment. We will be scanning the comments and sharing them as we chat. We are going to be talking about leaks. We are going to be talking about what's been running in the media this week. We're going to start off with my trip to Prague. I was invited to speak at the Forum Media, which is this incredible conference for PR people and media people. It's been running for 25 years in the Czech Republic. And what really struck me was the importance that the country places in communications, because we had the president of the Czech Republic turn up, and not only did he speak, but he talked about the importance of media literacy and the importance of the work that we do as PR people, as media people, as marketing people in upholding democracy and the benefit it has to society. So that was wonderful. We had incredible speakers that came from all over the world, and I gave a talk, interestingly enough, on looking at the impact of AI on the PR industry. But instead of the doom and gloom that everyone has, I took people back a little bit back to the beginning of Edward Bernays. Often people say is our godfather of PR, of modern day PR. And Edward Bernays, he was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and he basically was the one who started practicing public relations back in the day in the form that we see it. And he foresaw PR as a very different discipline to what it has been in the last few decades. He very much saw it as a strategic management discipline, bringing in a confluence of experts from research and from sort of psychologists and so forth. Of course, he was a nephew of Sigmund Freud. And perhaps if we've got some images that we can share from from Prague, which would be brilliant, as I tell you a little bit about the thoughts. And the thoughts were really that we ended up with a situation where we became reduced in
30 different sculptures, and it's quite beautiful.
Wow. Farzan, I saw you post that on social media, that video. And it was one, you know how you're scrolling, and it was another Farzana piece. And I thought I was going to scroll past it, and I loved it.
You can't scroll past a Farzana piece.
No, and now she's out of the Uber. I don't know if your audio. Oh, there it is. Your audio is on. So what square were you in? Because that totally captured my imagination.
So in Prague, I actually was in this beautiful bridge called the Charles Bridge, and it has 30 statues. And I'm so sorry, I was meant to be home 5 minutes ago, but it was absolutely beautiful. But the whole incredible talk was really about actually how AI isn't going to reduce us even further into just tactical, but actually elevate us into strategy, because it will do all of the sort of, the work of, the grind aspects of PR that will unleash our ability to focus on research and planning and strategy and measurement and evaluation. And that's what I wanted to ask you guys about. Do you think AI is going to be something that's going to bring us back to the original golden era of PR, or is it going to be the death of us?
You broke up a little bit, but I think the question was on whether AI will take us back to the golden era of PR. I don't know if I agree with you that Bernays was the golden era of PR, but maybe that's a conversation for a different.
Basil Clark, maybe Basil Clark would be in there as well.
Yeah, I think there were some founding fathers, more fathers than mothers, unfortunately. But I guess what really struck me, and I will come back to your AI question, but you'd also commented that you thought PR should be a management discipline, and I was going to ask Doug what you think about that. I think that it should be, and it could be. I'm not sure that it's there yet. In fact, I'm pretty sure that it's not there yet, at least in most settings, most corporate settings. But Doug, what do you think?
No, I completely agree. Farzana and I, with our podcast Stories and Strategies, we have multiple audiences, but when you create your personas, one of the personas that we've created is executives who hire and fire comms people, because they need to live and breathe this stuff. And as we move forward in this AI world, one aspect of AI is there's going to be a ton of content out there, and the battle is going to be for trust. And I know we sort of hear that as a buzz phrase, but trust is built over a repetitive time period, being consistent and showing your values, and that's leadership. Public relations done properly, not spin, not doctoring things. Good public relations is built on foundations like trust. Absolutely. Executives need to live and breathe that.
Yeah. I know when I've sat around board tables and seen how they operate, even with some big companies, the PR person, the comms person usually doesn't have the same sort of gravity assigned to them as the chief legal counsel or the CFO. And I don't know if that's a reflection of the person or the way PR is perceived, or just the bigger backdrop. If you're the CFO, you do have some accounting principles you have to respect. You have some fiduciary responsibilities you need to meet. If you're the chief legal counsel, you have to give advice on what's legal and what's not. We don't really have those sort of mandated regulatory requirements in PR. And I think in some ways that keeps us relegated to a slightly lower level of influence in corporate strategy and corporate.
Well, and that brings in the discussion of regulation and certification for our craft. But Farzana, you and I have talked about, I know you're more pro regulation than I am for public relations, because it infringes on, to me, it goes to that free speech argument that we could have forever and a day. But Farzana, over to you.
And you made it back to your desk.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I made it back. I don't know. I just think that we live in a very different world. We live a world where we have polarization, we have misinformation, we have disinformation, and the argument for regulation for our industry is, I think, a much more compelling argument than it was before, because back in sort of, I don't know, 16 years ago when I started, it was very much, we didn't have much power per se. We were just pitching to gatekeepers, but now we're the gatekeepers. We don't need to go via journalists to put information into the public domain. We put it directly. And with that comes enormous power and responsibility. And I also think there are bad actors out there. And we have seen societies have these fault lines that are created by division. We've seen some PR firms at the heart of it, which I won't name any names, but I do think that actually regulation is something that should at least be discussed, and we should acknowledge that we aren't living in a society and a information system that we were 16, 20 years ago. We're living in a different world where everyone produces information, and disinformation and misinformation has got very clear consequences.
Yeah. Well, I've kind of err on the side of thinking maybe regulation would help, not just elevate the role of PR. I don't know if that really needs to happen for society, but I think it would give us a more meaningful set of contributions to business. I didn't mean to dodge your question about what AI would do, and it always seems to sneak into our conversations. I really think the impact of AI on life is going to be much bigger than what it does to PR. And in some ways, I feel like we're almost kind of naive to think, oh, is it going to change the way press releases are produced? Yeah, but it's going to do a lot more than that. And if you think back to other times that the architecture of communication has changed or evolved, really all of life has changed and evolved around that. If you think about the printing press and what that ushered in, you think about broadcast media, what that ushered in. I think we're in that kind of transformation, and it's bigger than just moving PR a little bit forward or backward. It's going to be more fundamental than that.
I had a client yesterday say he's letting go of middle management all over the place because it takes him less time to instruct the AI and get something produced than to explain it to them and have them do it the way he wants it.
Right.
That's scary.
Well, we debated whether we would introduce this. It's been in the headlines a lot. This question of whether we're on the edge of an AI bubble or not. There was a lot of chatter on a lot of business press in the last couple of weeks. It seems to have walked back a little bit since then. I think OpenAI had better results than people were necessarily anticipating. So maybe we're not, plunging into another .com type of bubble. But I don't know that we're out of danger yet there. In any case, this technology, in my opinion, will continue to advance, move forward, and have real changes in the way we think, communicate, and operate. So for that, I don't know if we got to do your conference justice. I see where we are on time. Anything you want to say at the end of that before we move into the next? You met the Czech president. That's cool.
Also there was a dinner that was held beforehand for the speakers by the British ambassador to the Czech Republic, and we talked a lot about public diplomacy. And I thought it was quite interesting because diplomacy is always considered quite sort of old and crusty. And they had a brilliant comms team, and they brought together all these ideas of being ambassador for the day. So a young person becoming ambassador for the day, and then having a sort of social media chart all of their sort of minutes of the day and what it means, along with their reflections at the end. And it made me realize that actually it's so important that diplomacy and politics is accessible to young people, because you have a lot of sort of apathy amongst younger generations, because actually these institutions don't do a good enough job in communicating and outreaching. And I thought hats off to the British ambassador to the Czech Republic for actually understanding that and reaching out. And here we had the Czech president, and we also had the Czech president who was, again, understanding the importance and the power of communications. So I think that when you have people at the helm that understand, they basically bring people in, great communicators. They engage stakeholders. It isn't rocket science, but it's nice to see when you see it done well in practice.
Well, sounds like a fantastic event, and look forward to hearing further comments on that. I wanted to talk a little bit about leaks. I just felt like everywhere I looked last week and the week before, the headlines were driven by somebody leaking something to somebody else about something important. And in fact, go back a week and a half ago, I think, just before we went on the air last week, Axios produced a 28-point peace plan. Some are saying it was actually produced in Russia. It's definitely Russia friendly. That's a whole other conversation, but that kicked off a whole flurry of negotiations. People flying back and forth across oceans trying to decide, was this an American plan? Was it a Russian plan? A few days later, Axios Bloomberg produced a transcript of a conversation between the key Russian negotiator and the key American negotiator, basically coaching the Russian on how to deal with Trump and to move that negotiation forward. But it was a leaked transcript. Any number of parties could have probably had access to it. Apparently, some of these conversations were on unencrypted media. And then just here in the UK, where we are, Farzana, the Chancellor's budget was apparently accidentally leaked just 45 minutes before she was presenting it to a packed house. And I think there's still some questions about where that came from. So rather than trying to dissect each of those leaks, which we probably won't ever know all the real information about it, I'm just wondering what you think about leaks in general. It seems like we're talking about it a lot. Somebody made some decisions to produce these things. I was curious from your point of view, Farzana, as I consider you sort of the good fairy of PR ethics. And if do you see leaks as an ethical form of tactical activity? And Doug, your view as a journalist, how do you look at leaks? And I'll share maybe a couple perspectives from my point of view. But what do you think?
I think leaks are really interesting, because I think leaks actually open the curtain to issues in culture, a lack of alignment. And so if you have leaks, it often shows that the person that is leaking doesn't feel safe enough to bring up their issues to sort of management or to leadership. It also shows that there is a lack of alignment in the culture. So I think when you do see these leaks, I mean, there are all sorts of legislative aspects and a legal lens on leaks as well, because you have various different legislations in different countries that protect, for instance, whistleblowers. And so when is it a leak and when is it sort of whistleblowing? So I think that's another sort of dimension to add. But I think when I look at an organization leaking, I sort of think to myself, people are leaking because they do not believe in the leadership. and the management and the decisions that they're making. And it makes me think, how are they running that organization? And it makes me think about their internal communications and their employee engagement aspect as well, that they haven't given a forum for people to often voice their concerns and their issues, and leaks are often sometimes of a last resort.
Yeah. Doug, what do you think?
I think so. You asked me as a journalist, and we always sort of saw them as strategic, that there was a purpose typically behind the leak. And as Farzana's saying, maybe it's a lack of trust on the inside, but political parties and organizations leak information all the time. It's a really old strategy. Sometimes often they do it to get ahead of the narrative, to try to dictate the narrative. And then when the rest of the piece comes out, the budget or whatever it is, it's compared against the original leak of information, which is how they want to control it. It could be to test public reaction, to soften bad news. It could be to force opponents into a particular corner. Apple was famous for leaks as a brand. It would do so to try to hype up anticipation or manage expectations for something new. So ethically, I would look at the leak. What's the motivation? Is it truthful? Is it accurate? Or is it deceptive? What's the impact? Is it causing harm, or is it providing benefit? And then the context. Is it whistleblowing or political warfare?
Right. And what a show. There was my phone going off in the middle of your comments. I hope it didn't cut over too much. Yeah, and the examples I gave, were kind of possibly state actors involved, and that's probably at a different level than most of us than I've ever operated on. But it did make me think about, in my own career, whether I have leaked information. I went back and looked. The PRSA in the US, the CIPR, both frown on leaks, or at least mishandling confidential information. So I don't know if they use the word leak specifically in the code, but there's definitely sort of a frown on that. But I was thinking about two different examples. I teach a journalism course to some graduates in Rome, and I take them through a couple of case studies. And one of them I would call kind of a strategic leak. And they actually, as journalists, didn't see it as a problem or a leak. But the short version of the story is that I was working with a small organization was taking on a bigger coalition of larger organizations, so kind of a David and Goliath story. And they'd issued an analysis about why their point of view on a particular policy was better than the bigger players in the industry. Not really very newsworthy by itself. I sent it to the New York Times, the AP, I think the Washington Post at the time. And then I sent it to the PR people at the bigger organizations. And I said, as a courtesy, I'm letting you know we sent this to these news outlets. If you want to respond, I just want to give you a heads up. And it got a lot of coverage because they did respond, because they did go to CNN, they did go to the Post. So you can't run this without our point of view. And the strategy behind that is that this report never would have seen the light of day without these bigger players calling in to say that they wanted to have a point of view. I don't know if that qualifies as a leak or not, but the journalism students didn't think it was. The other story, more tactical, literally we'd produced, there was a press conference with some study results that were going to be very newsworthy. And there was, it was a positive for my client, a positive study, but there were some nuances to it that could get lost in a press conference. You never know who's going to ask what, and it could have been a good story overshadowed by some of the nuances, or it could have just been a good story. So I literally handed this story to CNN moments before the press conference so that they would run a good story on it. They didn't have much time. They were in broadcast. They weren't in print. That was much more of a classic leak. And there, the journalism students had a problem with it. They thought that I didn't give the other journalist a fair shake. Maybe the story had been distorted. It almost definitely was as a result of that. And they saw that as possibly a thumbs down. So anyway.
That's the other aspect, is if the leak is to media that is going to favor you. And let's face it, that exists a lot. You're right. Yeah. And that's where other media will come at you with teeth showing, because they smell a rat.
Yeah. Well, I just find these stories really interesting. We always look for what's going on in the world, but also how does it reflect what's happening in some sort of PR decision-making space. And I think about this all the time. We can't always compare ourselves to the CIA or to the Russian government in terms of what sort of tactics they might use. But I think we do occasionally get presented with our own decisions. I'm going to move us just to something you and I exchanged quite a bit about this week, Doug. And it was this essay written by Derek Thompson on Substack. And I highly recommend him to follow. But it was called Everything is Television, or Everything is Becoming Television. And his hypothesis, his premise was that every medium, every format, every media content is beginning to move and look a lot more like TV. And he didn't mean like broadcast TV. He was saying more like the episodic flow of visual imagery. And he had some examples. I think he looked at Facebook saying that they weren't really a social media company. They were more of a video company. He had an example that I think was interesting to you about YouTube becoming,
number one for podcasts.
Number one for podcasts, but with the video background. So I want to give you a chance to respond to that. But just, my take is that, yeah, I think that things are looking a lot more like television. I was thinking, I've met two different corporate narrative advisors, consultants, and both of them frame their whole package for companies on how to make the corporate story sound more TV-ish, to move episodically, to create heroes and counter heroes and real drama to that. And I thought that's a really interesting way of looking at things. And I think we do it even when we talk about this show. We start talking about what's the scene going to be rather than writing paragraphs for it. And I just want to give you both a chance to respond. If you haven't seen the essay, it doesn't matter. Just more this idea that we're moving more towards a visual dominated medium and what that means.
Yeah, for me, I mean, that all sounds like story, and video just happens to be the way we're moving it along. In the metaverse, video might yield to something else, but video will probably never go away. So Derek's with The Atlantic. He's a heck of a writer. I love the piece. I do want to clarify that one point. He says at one point in the article that YouTube is now number one by a mile. It's not even close as the most popular platform for podcasts. Not quite. There are recent studies that show YouTube is the most popular discovery channel for podcasts. Absolutely. But people are finding podcasts and then listening on Spotify in most of the world and Apple here in North America. So we're not linear beasts that way. And most consumption time for podcasts is audio on Apple or Spotify, or even really interesting, Gen Z is listening to podcasts on YouTube and not even watching the video. I had a great chat on the WhatsApp group, David, this week with Andrew Bruce Smith, Michelle Wyckoff Smith, Natasha Plowman, Susie Giles, Matt Lube, Nigel Sarbutz, Stuart Bruce, Shaoni Lynn in Wales, Mark Jackson and Jamie White all chipping in on this discussion, seeing that same behavior about Gen Z. They're listening to podcasts on YouTube. Derek's bigger point, though, is spot on. The constant stream of video is replacing time spent on other things like books, like well thought out articles like this one, good conversations, which David, I know you and I have the same base philosophy. Good, longer conversations are going to make the world a better place. Now we're sitting and we're doom scrolling instead of having conversations. We're doing it at the dinner table. My wife and I will do it while we're watching our TV show together. And honestly, the week Unspun is our effort to push back and spark those longer conversations, but using video to make room for deeper thinking. Because if everything is turning into television, we might as well use the screen to pull people back into the room.
Well, if I could say this in our favor, yeah. we it's the reason we do this live too, to make it conversational and not us just reading scripts in front of the camera. So it has its moments as we've seen today. But I think about this also from a corporate communications perspective. I think a lot of us still think in terms of a written document as being the basis for forming our thoughts, for organizing, bigger theses around them. And communicating. If you think about how we were all trained to write essays, or I trained as a journalist. I learned how to write in inverted pyramid form, but it was still all textual based. And I think there is a richness to writing and reading that organizes your thoughts differently. I don't know that video is better, but it is different. And I can already see my own thought processes moving towards a visual way of thinking and organizing my thoughts. And I just wonder if corporate communications is moving apace with that. Are reports enough? Are text based documents the way to really engage and communicate? Fascinating time.
So I wanted to bring in this comment from Dr. Mike Short, and I think it's relevant to actually what we've been discussing, because if you think about it, television now is becoming increasing, or TV style format of communications is becoming increasingly the norm. But why? And I would argue it's because to do with cha-ching. Back in the day, the only people who could afford TV style formats were these, very, very sort of well-funded media outlets. But now look at us. We have the ability to communicate the week Unspun using the softwares that we do. It's become much more accessible. The barriers to entry in terms of cost and technical expertise have dramatically lowered. And so TV was always an effective medium. The only barriers were cost and technical expertise. And now with the softwares that are very user-friendly, the costs have plummeted, that it's become a lot more sort of accessible. And if we look at Dr. Mike Short's comment, does everyone have bread on the table, local versus national versus international? I would say that actually, I think there is a greater accessibility for mediums such as television style format, and indeed just wider communications. I think that it has become more inclusive by its nature. But of course, now you've got the rise of the strategic algorithms that I think all of a sudden is changing the game, and it's not this utopian landscape that we originally thought it would be.
Yep. So more. You see this more opportunity than threat. Is that
well?
Fair?
I think we had a little bit of opportunity, but I think the gates are closing of opportunity, because now you've got I think the owners of various different platforms are beginning to understand the power that they have with their algorithms, that they cannot just use it in terms of increasing eyeballs, but there's political pressure on the owners of a lot of the social media platforms. And so I think you're beginning to see the door closing in terms of that initial opportunity that was meant to be for all. I think it still is to a certain extent. Everyone still with a smartphone has the ability to publish, but whether the algorithms will give you the same level playing field as a more favored user politically or geographically, obviously is up to the new kings and queens of those who own the algorithm.
Well, right now, YouTube's algorithm is the one that all the content creators want, right? Number one for search, because it's Google. At the same time, also helps me come up in the searches in ChatGPT and Gemini. And then Spotify has jumped on this. We post this podcast visually on Spotify. Instead of the audio, we publish the visual version, let you in on the strategy, because the algorithm gives it an attention boost. It's more, the algorithm magically helps us.
Well, we could go on with this all day, but we've reached the end of our allotted 30 minutes. Doug, you want to read us out?
Awesome. Another good show. Farzana, I love the live feel of this, driving all the way back from Prague, joining us in the Uber on the way here. Just bravo for that. And I don't know how Curzon pays for that. As always, thanks to superstar producers Emily Page and David Olajide. The Week Unspun is a co-production of Curzon Public Relations, Stories and Strategies, and Folgate Advisors. Shows go fast. We got the recordings on Apple, Spotify, the video obviously, and YouTube. And just one final thought to take you through, to think about for the weekend. In everything you do, with each action you take, you're casting a ballot for whom you will become and how people will see you. Have a great weekend.
Bye.